Sitting across from Skryarst, I contemplated so many things. And, looking over the chronostide board floating between the two of us, I knew my heart was not in the game, as it was not one of them. Arst, for his part, had said nothing about it for the first game, as I played more at random than with any set strategy or plan. After I lost the second game in less than 2 acts, he began to speak far less and slowed his plays down, allowing me to get lost in the maelstrom of thought I was so obviously subsumed by at the moment. During what had to be our 5th game, he decided it was time to pull me from my contemplations by reaching over and cutting off the game mid-play. He looked over the board, now resting on the table between us, and spoke. "What's the problem, Cathian?" Before I could begin, he continued. "I know Nov's been gone for a month without a word, and ever since you got that message a couple of days after he vanished, you've been moody, quiet, and distracted. No one knows what's going on. Lassen and Justique are still in the home city and have been for months. And to be frank, Cathian, people are getting nervous. Truth be told, I'm starting to lean in that direction myself. So, what's the matter?" Having said his piece, he sat back, waiting for my response. I drew out a folded parchment, the message in question that had been delivered. I set it on the table and I slid it towards him. He unfolded it and began to flip through the now small pile of sheets that manifested as he opened it. "It's magical," I explained. "There's over 200 sheets there. Specs for 4 different models of advanced ground vehicles, with the fielded unit of them being 1 command vehicle, 2 arty and anti-air focus units, 2 more close support and troop transports able to carry nearly a company apiece, and to round it off, 5 super heavy assault weapon platforms." Arst looked up from the papers. "These are an issue, yes, but still, they're easily within the range for what we have planned for. Surely." I could only sigh. "Keep reading. There's also specs for a Griffon-class airship, carrier configuration, with a full complement, 8-4 split between multi-role air supremacy and close support units and transports. Each of them up to accompany themselves in capacity." He didn't bother looking down to confirm. "That is more than an issue, and can I assume D.Block has somehow acquired these craft?" "From what I can tell, they've only made the order and prepaid for the craft. Our friendly informant, whoever they are, sent only the purchase order, receipt of funds, and specs. Delivery date is some 9 or 10 months away yet. Looks like someone at Ego either likes us or really doesn't like D.Block. So, what's the bigger issue? It's not like we don't have plans for such eventualities. Don't we aim to be able to contend with dragons if needed?" Arst was not wrong, and given the time and resources, Farmhold could easily hold off and defeat even this collection of super heavy assets. But that was the rub. We had most of the time needed, but only some of the resources. "Simple, Arst. We don't have enough Chris. Not nearly enough for all the systems we need in place to defend against all that, plus whatever else D.Block might throw at us. The wiring for the city and the point defense Chris guns alone will stretch our reserves to the breaking point. And the prices on the market for the remaining Chris that will be needed are on the rise, with all this talk of conventions of inter-realm conflict being tossed about by the High Realms Council. Ars shook his head at the mention of affairs of inter-realm business. The fools floating about the stars are not our concern, Cathian. However, I may have a solution for you. It wouldn't completely resolve the shortage, but it should take a significant load from it. His face scrunched as he thought about this idea. I should check with the Smithmaster Hammertone and Chanlos to see if it's a viable plan. Be that as it may, you could at least clue me in to your idea. I was frankly desperate for a solution. I could have not been able to think of one myself. Well, I was thinking, we could replace the point defense systems with something else. Say, rotary C-bolt systems? Fewer Chris required overall, and of cheaper and more available types as well. We could move those guns already built to more critical positions, as well as repurposing the parts that are not yet assembled for more critical tasks. Might mess with the timetable though. I was quiet for a long moment, running numbers in my head and realizing the brilliance of the idea. I almost didn't feel the sting of not coming up with it myself. Almost. Go and see if it'll work. I think it will. And give Chandler these specs. I'd imagine he will want to work on countermeasures. Thank you for the idea, Arst. You may have covered about, half the shortfall? Maybe a bit more or less. Chandler will be able to calculate that. Every bit helps though. Thank you, Arst. Oh, and if you could, when you ask, specify for rotary C-bots systems. Trust me, the Smithmaster will not find the difference a joking matter. Ars merely smiled a bit wider. Of course. Nice to see that fancy education actually taught you something useful. If you actually even know the difference. I'll be back later with a summary of the adjustment to the plans for this, and by then you had best have your head clear and ready to play. You owe me 5 games now, and I expect to get them. By the 9 and 4, welcome back to the library, where, in this entry, we are going to look at one of the most ubiquitous forms of ranged weaponry in the realms, that is not either a bow or a Christ energy weapon, but takes inspiration from both at various times in this weapon's long and venerable history. That being the weapon most commonly known across the realms as a B.O.L.T.S launcher. I am the recorder, and as my regular viewers and perceptive patrons are aware, this will be just an introduction to the history and many forms of this weapon. Before we get into the history and evolution of this weapon, its derivatives and successors, we need to have a small sidebar on the name commonly given to this weapon, and how in most cases, it is flat out inaccurate. You see, the common name B.O.L.T.S is actually an acronym for Basic Offensive Light Target Stake, and thus actually only refers to one basic variant of this weapon, and more precisely, its ammunition, with B.O.L.T.S being the normal variant, B.O.L.T.S being the heavy variant, and B.O.T.S being the pistol or hand variant. However, as shall be explained shortly, this misnaming is partially due to the weapon's evolution, as well as laziness on the part of most non-dwarves. These weapons are most often misnamed simply as bolt launchers or bolters, with affixes of light and heavy or pistol instead of their proper names. Among the dwarves, the creators of this weapon, this serves as a particular irritant, and can, on occasion, serve to elicit a rant on the long and noble history of the weapon and why it's named as it is. Sidebar over. Let us begin with those very same dwarves, and let us turn the clock back to the earliest days, in the time before time, when they first began to carve their mountain homes. You see, the dwarves had a bit of a problem. The caves and mountains that they were making their home within were not absent of life, and they had to fight to establish their realm. From elemental creatures to subterranean wildlife, the early dwarves did not lack for foes to fight for the caves and hollows of the mountains. What they did lack, however, was a way to effectively fight them at range, as most of their foes learned early on just how proficient they were with those picks, hammers, and axes, so worked to keep their distance as much as possible. Fortunately, for the lovers of ore, crystal, and stone, they had recently met the elven people, and as such were introduced to their weapon of choice, the bow. The dwarves, having seen what an elven archer could do, were intrigued, but knew the bow as it was would not be a particularly effective weapon in the dark and often cramped tunnels that the dwarves often had to fight in. Thus, they began to work to adapt the bow to their needs, and created what is the first great sea change in weapons technology, the crossbow. Simple to produce and requiring the merest fraction of time to train to achieve proficiency with as compared to a bow, the designs and plans for the crossbow spread far and wide after its invention, seeing it become the baseline for ranged weaponry across Jam'mar for many armies and militias. However, this new weapon was not what the dwarves were looking for. The crossbar, as well as the time and room required for reloading, were seen as unsuitable for tunnel conditions. So once more, they went back to the drawing board, and this time, the great Feathertot, Dwarven Wonderkin, would earn his name with the designs that would become the core of the B.O.L.T.S launcher, namely the piston spring system that allows the launcher to fire with such force and rapidity, as well as the power cog that allows the mechanical energy stored within the weapon's removable ammo box to be used to fire the weapon. This weapon would be able to fire its entire reserve of 10 metal stakes, either one at a time or in a rapid-fire hail of pointed metal death, without needing to stop to pull back a string or set a stake between shots. Reloading took little time with practice, and thus this new weapon saw rapid adoption across the peoples of the Dwarven nation. With personal, light, standard, and heavy variants, there are very few foes that couldn't be felled via the use of these weapons. Personal versions of the weapons, mainly due to their concealability, began to find their ways into the hands of assassins across the world, who made devastatingly deadly use of them. Still, in those early days, but a few years after the introduction of the weapon itself, and after Feathertot's ascension to study as a student of the Analar, where he gets his name from consequently, we see the first, and for many ages, only major variation of the weapon that is not simply a scaling of the weapon up or down in size. After the weapon had made its first few rounds, and people were already to begin simply calling them bolt launchers, seeing them as just an upgraded fancy crossbow, which, to be fair, at this point is not completely inaccurate. Two of Feathertot's former students, a gnome and a halfling, created and released the rotary version, available in all the normal variants. Boasting a 100 stake capacity, it was a major improvement in firepower. However, it was also far too cumbersome to be a replacement for the original, and in fact was not even intended to do so. Planned for use as a mounted or an emplaced weapon, where the large and cumbersome ammo cylinders could be stored reasonably, as well as allowing the mounting to deal with the weight of the weapon, letting it be aimed and fired accurately by even the weakest and smallest of the little folk. These weapons were designed to be used on the caravans of trade that were beginning to make their way across the lands of Gryphon'sLibrary, and to serve as a deterrent for any that might see them as potentially easy pickings. While there would be individuals who would insist on using these as squad weapons, using magical storage for the ammo and other gear needed to reload the cylinders, only the rotary B.O.L.T.S was ever actually designed with individual use considered. Often called sliver slingers or needle storm guns, these weapons feature an arm bracer stock to aid with the weapon's weight and recoil, and are some 1.5 to 2.5 feet in length. And while the thin stakes fired from it are not as deadly as its larger brothers, they are more than capable of piercing even plate armor, front and back, in optimal conditions. And in less than optimal conditions, the vast amount of fire will see those stakes that don't breach the back of the armor soon joined by many of its fellows, all to the deadly detriment of the target. As the ages would pass, from those early days, the weapon system saw itself spread far and wide. Valued for its power and compact size in its normal form, and its ability to hold off large numbers in its rotary version. While expensive compared to crossbows, constant production, as well as the durability in design and function that the dwarves are rightly famed for, has seen this weapon become ubiquitous across Gryphon'sLibrary, often serving as a family heirloom, something to be passed down from generation to generation down the family line to defend from the danger of the wider world. Also aiding in the promulgation of this weapon system is the fact that it is a tradition to send a soldier home with their entire equipment kit as part of their payment for their services if they are on their first campaign or their first enlistment. This saw many more of the weapons enter the public domain than would have otherwise been likely, and thus ensured a steady trade in the ammo boxes and cylinders, as well as the stakes used as ammo, which most dwarven smiths can produce in their sleep, creating a stable and enduring market for these weapons across the ages, going mostly unchanged until sometime in the Age of Valor, meaning some 15,000 years between the introduction of the base and rotary versions and its first significant redesign. It is understandable why the weapon has been able to reach so far and wide. And this is where we will end the first part of our look into this most long-lived of weapon systems, again in an effort to keep these entries to a manageable length. The further tale of this weapon and the developments it would undergo in later ages will have to wait until part 2 of our look into this subject. Until then, I hope you have a better understanding of the basics of the B.O.L.T.S system, and I look forward to seeing you as we conclude in part 2. So, until you next make your way back to the library for our next entry, I want to thank my regular viewers and perceptive patrons, as well as everyone else, for your support and your interest. Thank you. I have, as always, been the Recorder. And by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. Later that evening, after spending the day checking with both the Smith Master and Chanlos, and working out the details for the new weapon systems and how much Christ and other resources would be saved by this change, Scry Arst triumphantly entered the main cabin, where Cathion and the brothers alone lived. Finding the cabin cold, dark, and empty, with Cathion's gear exactly where it had been when he left, Arst cast his gaze about the cabin, and soon found himself transfixed on the mantle, and to the 3 candles that sat there alight. He knew little of the blue flame or its tricks, but it had been explained to him that each candle was kept alight by its creator's own life force, one for each of the brothers. But Cathion's candle was wrong. Its flame seemed reduced and split, with 4 flickering sub-flames burning beside the main. That is when he felt something, and it was like nothing Arst had ever experienced. It was agony, pain, helplessness, all bound together in horror, and it sent involuntary shivers and chills down Arst's metal spine, and made him feel a terror in the pit of a gut he had not possessed in centuries. He fled the cabin, the horror fading but still echoing in Arst's mind and soul. He could say but one thing as he sprinted towards the Celestians' node house, kicking up large clouds of dust with each leaping, bounding step. What in the name of the V's is happening to you, Cathion? And where are the realms are you, child? If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching.